The day I found him standing in our living room with his suitcase packed, I knew my world was about to crumble. After 50 years of marriage, my husband Walter didn't have the decency to look me in the eye when he said, "Elaine, I'm leaving you." His voice was steady, rehearsed. Margaret's husband passed away 3 months ago. She needs me now, and I need to spend what's left of my life with her. At 70, my husband had decided to abandon our half-century marriage for his high school sweetheart. The wedding photos they posted online made them internet sensations, two silver-haired lovebirds finding each other in their twilight years. The world swooned over their epic romance, while I was erased from the narrative entirely. I wasn't prepared for how quickly my daughter Susan sided with her father. "Mom," that she said with that practiced patience one uses with difficult children, "Dad and Margaret were torn apart decades ago. Haven't you had him long enough?" Her words cut deeper than Walter's betrayal. My own flesh and blood, the child I had sacrificed so much for, now treated me like an inconvenient obstacle to her father's happiness. Susan had always admired Margaret's literary career and social connections. Having a famous author as a stepmother trumped loyalty to the mother who had raised her. In everyone's eyes, I was never good enough for Walter. I was just the uneducated housewife who couldn't discuss literature or philosophy with his academic colleagues. They didn't know that I had given up my chance at college so Walter could attend. My father had used our family's savings to pay for Walter's education instead of mine. I had supported Walter through his graduate studies, worked alongside my parents in our small town to save money, and believed his promise. "Don't worry, Elaine. Once I graduate and get a good job, I'll bring you to live with me. We'll have a good life together." Over the years, Walter grew increasingly dismissive of me. "Why don't you read something, learn something?" he would say with contempt. "I'm embarrassed to tell my students my wife is so poorly educated." He never allowed me to visit his workplace, insisting I leave anything he needed with the security guard. At home, we eventually stopped sharing not just a bed, but entire rooms. He claimed he needed quiet space for his research, but I later discovered he was preserving himself for Margaret all along. When I arrived at their wedding reception, Walter gripped Margaret's hand tightly, his voice trembling. "Elaine, don't ruin my wedding. Let's part on good terms." I smiled and replied, "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to give you both a grand gift." As the celebration continued around us, I calmly revealed 3 devastating truths Walter and Margaret had been carrying on their affair long before her husband Frank died. The research grants Walter secured had largely funded Margaret and her family, and despite our marriage, Walter had emotionally abandoned me decades ago, saving himself for her. The room fell silent. Walter's face darkened with rage, but for the first time in years, I felt light. I announced that our divorce wasn't finalized yet, and I wouldn't accept the insulting settlement they'd offered, sending me back to my hometown with a meager allowance after I'd given everything to our family. "I may be 70 years old," I declared, "but I've lived long enough to finally see things clearly." With the help of a determined lawyer and testimony from Frank's nephew Patrick, who had photographic evidence of Walter and Margaret's long-standing affair, I secured a fair settlement of $300,000. I used that money to purchase land in the countryside and build a charming farm-to-table restaurant. Growing my own vegetables, raising chickens and ducks, I created a peaceful retreat that soon gained popularity among visitors seeking authentic, pesticide-free meals. Meanwhile, Walter and Margaret's reputations crumbled. The university terminated Walter's contract and removed his portrait from their halls. Publishers pulled Margaret's books from shelves. Susan, who had hoped to climb the social ladder using Margaret's connections, found herself isolated and rejected. "Mom, I messed up," she finally admitted during a tearful phone call. "I've lost everything." And as I stand on my farmhouse porch each evening watching the sunset, I reflect on the steep price I paid for the lessons I've learned. Yet I've never felt more at peace. My happiness isn't about proving others wrong or seeking revenge. It's about creating a space where I can truly be myself. In my 70s, I finally built a life that is authentically mine, free from manipulation and betrayal, and that, more than anything Walter or his precious Margaret ever had, is enough. The look in my daughter Sarah's eyes that afternoon will haunt me for the rest of my days. Cold indifference masquerading as righteous conviction. "Mom, don't take it too hard," she said, her voice eerily calm as she arranged a bouquet of fresh flowers meant for her father's new bride. "Dad and Martha are a perfect match. And let's be honest, you're just a housewife. You've had so many good years with Dad. Shouldn't you be grateful?" Those words stabbed deeper than my husband Richard's betrayal. At 70, I expected some measure of respect from the daughter I had raised, fed, clothed, and loved unconditionally. But there she stood, choosing sides with shocking ease, eager to exchange her simple, uneducated mother for a stepmother with social connections and literary acclaim. When I unexpectedly appeared at their wedding reception, Sarah quickly pushed through the crowd to intercept me, frustration evident in her voice. "Mom, what are you doing here? Today is Dad's big day if you're here to make a scene. Don't blame me for getting upset." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Dad and Martha were forced apart for nearly 40 years because of you. Haven't you had him long enough?" "Because of me?" I questioned instinctively, wounded by the accusation. Sarah's unwavering gaze cut through me as she delivered her devastating assessment. "Dad is a scholar, an expert. His students are spread all across the country. He's a man of influence. And you..." Her pause was deliberate, meant to emphasize what followed. "You're nothing more than an uneducated housewife." Even my young grandson Tommy had been influenced by this narrative. "Grandma," he'd asked with innocent cruelty while swinging my hand as we walked, "does this mean you won't live with us anymore? I heard Mom and Grandpa talking about sending you back to your hometown." After a moment of deep thought, he'd added with brutal honesty, "If you leave, I won't get to eat your chocolate cake anymore. But if people find out my new grandma is Martha, they'll be so jealous of me." And the painful truth became clear. My family saw me as disposable, a placeholder, until someone better came along. Richard pursued his so-called true love, while Sarah wanted a stepmother who could boost her social standing. Both placed the blame squarely on me. "This is all your fault. If you had just educated yourself more, we wouldn't have ended up like this," Richard had declared before walking out of our home for the last time. For decades, I'd endured Richard's thinly veiled contempt. Despite years of marriage, he never allowed me to visit his workplace, not even to bring him lunch or important documents. "Leave it with the security guard," he'd insist, claiming I was just the housekeeper. When I timidly asked him to recommend books to improve myself, his response was dismissive. "Do you even have the ability to read them? Stop wasting time. If you have time for books, you should be in the kitchen. We're hungry." When I confronted Sarah at the wedding about her betrayal, her solution was to pull out cash from her purse. "Here, take $100, grab a cab, and go home. Don't make a scene. I'll come back after the wedding and have dinner with you. Okay? For years, I had been a housewife with no income of my own, while they meticulously controlled every penny of my allowance, ensuring I never had enough to save. Every expense had to be accounted for even when I fell ill. I had to request money for a doctor's visit. Now she was eager to throw cash at me, desperate to make me disappear. The breaking point came when I slapped her across the face, the sound echoing through the banquet hall. "Who do you think you're talking to?" My voice was ice cold. "You're bribing your own mother to leave just so your father can marry his mistress in peace. You're just as ungrateful as he is." As later, when our divorce battle became public, Sarah posted on social media, "My mother has been a housewife all her life, but she has a domineering personality. My father and I lived under immense pressure because of her." She portrayed Richard as a victim who had spent his entire life trapped in a hopeless marriage, only finding courage to seek freedom in his twilight years. After winning my settlement, I learned from one of Richard's former students that Sarah's life had begun to unravel. The social circle she had tried so hard to join, using Martha's reputation, saw through her intentions. Her career stalled, and she faced rejection everywhere she turned. Without Martha's influence, she had nothing to leverage. When she finally called me, her voice was barely a whisper. "Mom, I messed up. I've lost everything." "Oh," I replied softly, "you can't climb on the backs of others to get ahead. What you wanted was to take from others, but in the end, it only left you with nothing." As I tend to my flourishing farm-to-table restaurant, I've found peace far from the manipulation and betrayal of my former family. The daughter I raised had chosen status over loyalty, but in the end, she lost both. Some lessons come at a terrible price, but they come nonetheless. Fine, I admit your father helped me. Without him, I wouldn't have gone to college. I might have starved to death. But I've repaid that debt over the years, my husband George declared at his wedding to Eleanor, his voice dripping with practiced patience. After 50 years of marriage, his definition of repayment was sending me back to my rural hometown with a pittance while he started fresh with his college sweetheart. My chest tightened as Eleanor stepped forward, her voice gentle as though speaking to a confused child. "I know this must be hard for you, Dorothy. I'm not trying to erase the past. I accept that you and George had a long history together." Her condescending smile never reached her eyes as she added, "We're not asking you to leave with nothing. It's just that maintaining a household for all these years has been expensive, and there isn't much left. But don't worry when you move back to your hometown. George will still send you a living allowance. I'll even help cover the cost to renovate your old house." Their audacity was breathtaking. My entire life reduced to charity, as though I were a faithful but aging pet being rehomed after decades of service. Murmurs rippled through the wedding guests. "Oh, so that's what this is about. She just wants money. Figures." I knew she wouldn't let go so easily. What a schemer, what a disgrace, clinging to him for dear life even after he's moved on. I looked around at the elegant banquet hall, crystal chandeliers casting a dazzling glow over the celebration. On the massive projection screen, their wedding photos shone brilliantly with the hashtag "Love Knows No Fear" emblazoned beneath it. It felt like a slap to the face. These people knew nothing of our history, how my father had taken every last penny of our family's savings to pay for the tuition of his best friend's orphan son, George. To make that happen, I was forced to drop out of school. That night, I had overheard my mother crying, trying to suppress her sobs as she told my father, You should have let Dorothy go to college. If you don't, she'll end up just like me." My father only responded by silently puffing on his cigarette, but I hadn't been angry. Not even then. Instead, I had been happy for George, rushing to him, bursting with excitement. "You can go to school now, and when you come home, you can teach me everything you learn in college." Okay. The first time George left for school, he kept looking back with every few steps, as if burdened with guilt. That winter, he had held my hand and made a promise. "Dorothy, don't worry. Once I graduate and land a good job, I'll bring you to live with me. We'll have a good life together." But now, he looked down on me for my lack of education, saying we had nothing in common. More than once, he had told me, "Dorothy, why don't you write a book when you have time? Learn something. Otherwise, I'll be embarrassed to admit to my students that my wife is really lacking education." At my age, with a household full of responsibilities, where was I supposed to find the time to sit and read whenever I refused? He would grow impatient, toss his newspaper aside, and walk out the door, muttering Eleanor's name as he went. After their wedding, while they celebrated, I returned home and realized I had almost nothing to take with me, a single suitcase barely half full when I was done packing. When they returned from the reception, my daughter Amy offered with unusual politeness, "Mom, you can stay at the house for a while if you want. We're leaving for a short trip anyway." Eleanor's new book launch was happening in the next city over, and apparently they all wanted to make a trip out of it. I let out a soft laugh and shook my head. "Well, I hope you all have a wonderful trip." My calm response seemed to unsettle them more than anger would have. George cleared his throat, his voice careful. "Dorothy, I know you're a reasonable person. Just don't do anything foolish." All right. That night, I saw Amy's latest post online, a family portrait. In the photo, Amy leaned in close to Eleanor, their faces pressed together like mother and daughter. If Eleanor had ever had a biological daughter, she wouldn't have looked any different. I contacted a lawyer to draft a new divorce agreement. After listening to my story, he was furious. "Ma'am, in your situation, we must expose him as the guilty party in this marriage. Otherwise, if he argues in court that he supported you all these years, it could put you at a disadvantage when it comes to dividing assets." With his guidance, I recorded a short video and uploaded it to social media. In it, I laid everything out: the decades I had spent with George, the sacrifices I had made, and how I was being discarded like an old, useless object. "I don't want him back. I just want what I'm owed," I concluded. A line my lawyer had insisted I add. To my surprise, support flooded in. "Grandma, you did the right thing. You have to fight for your rights. You sacrificed everything for him. And now he wants to toss you aside with nothing. Hell no." And the tide had shifted in my favor. And with each passing day, I grew more determined to stand my ground. After a bitter legal battle, I received a settlement of $300,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to begin again. I bought land in my hometown and built a farmhouse restaurant that quickly gained popularity. Now, as I tend to my vegetables and greet customers, I found a peace I never knew possible, one where I answer to no one but myself. I should have known the truth years ago. The signs were there, scattered throughout our 50 years of marriage, like breadcrumbs leading to an inevitable conclusion. Every time Harold muttered, "I'm going over to Eleanor's for tea. Maybe I'll play a round of chess with Bill while I'm there." It wasn't about chess at all. It was about seeing the woman he had always considered his perfect match. The revelation came like a thunderclap when I stood in their wedding reception, watching my 70-year-old husband clutch Eleanor's hand with such tenderness, a tenderness he had withheld from me for decades. "Margaret, don't ruin my wedding," he pleaded, his voice trembling. "Let's part on good terms." I smiled, the weight of years of deception finally lifting from my shoulders. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to give you both a grand gift." The murmurs in the crowded banquet hall faded as I spoke 3 devastating truths that had been hidden in plain sight for nearly half a century. Our marriage had been a charade from the beginning. While I raised our daughter, maintained our home, and supported his academic career, Harold had emotionally checked out decades ago. I recalled with painful clarity how after I gave birth to our daughter, Olivia, he stopped sharing a bed with me. Eventually, he moved into a separate room altogether, claiming he needed quiet space for his research, that he didn't want to disturb my sleep. Even when Olivia was away at college, he maintained this arrangement, preserving what I now understood was his emotional and physical fidelity to Eleanor. "You weren't preserving your academic focus," I announced to the stunned guests. "You were preserving yourself for Eleanor." A hushed silence fell over the room before whispers erupted again. "Oh my God. Is she serious?" I thought Professor Harold was forced into his first marriage. But to treat her like that silent treatment for decades, that's just cruel. Harold's face darkened, his hands clenched at his sides. "This is humiliating," he muttered. "How could you say something like that in front of all these people?" I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, now you care about your dignity. You've had decades of dignity. Harold, where was that dignity when you were sneaking behind Bill's back? When you and Eleanor were carrying on your affair while her husband was still alive?" The moment the words left my mouth, the entire banquet hall erupted in scandalized murmurs. Harold's hand shot up, his finger nearly jabbing at my face, his whole body trembling with rage. "You foolish woman, do you have no shame?" he snarled. "Saying such things in public." I cut him off. "Yes, I am foolish." I smiled, slow and deliberate. "But at least I know the difference between right and wrong, unlike you two." The truth had been confirmed for me by Bill's nephew, Patrick, an avid photographer since youth. Patrick had documented what he wished he had never seen Eleanor with other men throughout the years. Among those men was Harold. The evidence was clear. Their affair had begun decades ago, long before Bill ever passed away. "These photos may be decades old," Patrick had said in his testimony, "but they're clear enough to show the truth. And among those men was Harold. Even I didn't expect that they had been entangled for so long." I remembered how devoted Bill had been to Eleanor, even after her illness had left her unable to have children. He had loved her fiercely, never wavering in his commitment. How cruel that while he showered her with genuine affection, she and Harold were plotting their eventual union, just waiting for the opportunity to be together publicly. Harold had maintained the facade of our marriage with surprising skill. To the outside world, we appeared to be a distinguished academic and his supportive, if simple, wife. But at home, the truth was evident in 1,000 tiny ways. How he insisted I never visit his workplace, not even to bring him lunch or important documents. How he dismissed my attempts to educate myself. How he controlled every penny I received, making sure I could never build any independence. "If you have time for books," he would say when I asked him to recommend reading material, "you should be in the kitchen. We're hungry." And his contempt was always thinly veiled, his affection always withheld. I had lived with the shell of a husband, one who had given his true self to another woman all along. When the scandal broke, public opinion shifted dramatically. Eleanor's books were pulled from shelves. Several publishing houses severed ties with her, issuing statements that deemed her actions morally reprehensible. Integrity matters as much as talent, one publisher declared. We value literature, but we value morality just as much. Harold, too, faced devastating consequences. The university quietly removed his portrait from their walls, erasing his legacy. The scholar who had built his reputation on intellectual integrity was exposed as a man who had lived a lie. In the settlement that followed our divorce, I received $300,000, not a fortune, but enough to start anew. I purchased land in the countryside and built a farmhouse restaurant that quickly gained popularity. There, among my vegetables and chickens, greeting customers with genuine warmth, I finally found the peace that had eluded me for 50 years. As I stood on the porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the hills in golden hues, I realized that the greatest gift from this painful journey was the truth. No more pretending, no more questioning my worth. At 70, I had finally learned that it's never too late to build a life on honesty, even if you must first tear down one built on lies. The email from someone named Daniel Willis arrived in my inbox like a bolt from the blue. Mrs. Bennett, you don't know me, but I believe I have information that could help your divorce case. I was Robert Wilson's nephew, Eleanor's late husband. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling slightly as I read further. Since I was young, I've had a passion for photography. My uncle supported my hobby. He even bought me my very first camera. And with that camera, I captured something I wished I had never seen. As I would later learn, Daniel had documented what most would have kept hidden evidence of Eleanor's affairs spanning decades. Among the men in those photographs was my husband, James. The affair I had recently discovered was not a late-life indiscretion, but a betrayal with roots reaching back almost 40 years. When my lawyer first received Daniel's evidence, he called me immediately, his voice charged with a mixture of shock and vindication. Mrs. Bennett, this changes everything. These photographs prove your husband and Eleanor maintained an inappropriate relationship while both were married to other people. This isn't just about them reuniting after Robert's death. They've been carrying on behind both your backs for years. Daniel agreed to record a video testimony, his face solemn as he spoke directly to the camera. Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Willis. I am, in name, Eleanor's nephew, but in reality, my uncle was Robert Wilson, Eleanor's husband, or should I say ex-husband now, since she wasted no time marrying someone else after his death. And his testimony continued, each word more devastating than the last. Since I was young, I've had a passion for photography. My uncle supported my hobby. He even bought me my very first camera. And with that camera, I captured something I wished I had never seen Eleanor with other men. He paused, visibly uncomfortable but determined to continue. For years, I struggled with what to do. Should I tell my uncle? Should I break his heart? But before I could decide, he was gone. And I can't help but wonder, was Eleanor to blame? She had been emotionally distant for years, and my uncle had been growing more and more despondent. The most damning revelation came next. Eleanor never even tried to hide her affairs. These photos may be decades old, but they're clear enough to show the truth. And among those men was James Bennett. Even I didn't expect that they had been entangled for so long. After his video was released, I called Daniel to thank him. There was silence on the other end of the line for a long moment before he finally sighed. Mrs. Bennett, you and my uncle are alike. You're both good people, and I refuse to let you suffer like he did. Some people may grow old, but their character remains rotten. People like that don't deserve our respect." When the evidence became public, it ignited a firestorm. The carefully constructed narrative of two star-crossed lovers finally reuniting in their golden years crumbled. Social media erupted with outrage on my behalf, with comments flooding in. "Wait, isn't this the woman from that high-profile wedding? The first wife grandma? You did the right thing. You have to fight for your rights." Former fans of Eleanor's literary work expressed their disillusionment. "I used to admire Eleanor so much, but after learning the truth, I can't believe I ever saw her as an inspiration." That one simple sentence carried enormous weight. Eleanor's books were pulled from shelves. Several publishing houses publicly severed ties with her, issuing statements. "Integrity matters as much as talent. We value literature, but we value morality just as much. Both are indispensable." James and Eleanor appeared at my door one evening, their dignity in tatters. Eleanor's knees buckled the moment she saw me, and she nearly threw herself to the ground. "June, please, I can't take this anymore. I'm begging you, let us go. Let this go." James stood beside her, his face flushed red with humiliation. For a long time, he said nothing, then in a low voice finally muttered, "If you leave Eleanor alone, I'll come back. We can go back to the way things were." I stared at him, incredulous, before letting out a short laugh. "You really think too highly of yourself, don't you?" His eyes flickered in surprise. "You actually believe I'm doing all this just to get you back, James? The day you asked for a divorce was the day I stopped considering you my husband. I'm not trying to win you back. I'm simply taking back what I deserve." Half an hour after they left, my lawyer called. "James has agreed to sign the divorce papers," he informed me. I wasn't surprised. James had spent his whole life obsessed with his reputation. There was no way he would drag himself to court over a divorce at 70, especially against a woman who had concrete evidence of his decades-long infidelity. The settlement was simple. The house would remain his, but aside from the cash in our accounts, he would compensate me with an additional $300,000. With that money, I bought land in my hometown and built a farmhouse restaurant that became my sanctuary and livelihood on Thanksgiving Day. As I was going over the accounts in my farmhouse, a young woman approached me hesitantly. "Excuse me, ma'am," she whispered, as if sharing a secret. "Are you that brave, divorced grandma?" There was a glimmer of curiosity and admiration in her eyes. She was one of James's former students and a former fan of Eleanor's books. "When I heard about your story," she continued, "I felt inspired. You proved that even at 70, you can start a new life. We all think you're incredibly brave." Through her, I learned that the fallout had been immense for James and Eleanor. The scandal hadn't just faded, it had left a permanent stain on their reputations. James's portrait had been removed from his university's walls, erasing his legacy. And as for me, I had built a life that was truly mine, free from deception, filled with purpose, and finally peace. The morning after Thomas left me for Sylvia, I sat at our kitchen table, the same oak table where we'd shared breakfast for nearly 50 years, and stared at the divorce papers he'd left behind. My hands trembled as I flipped through the document, each page revealing the cold, calculated manner in which my husband of 5 decades planned to discard me. According to his terms, I would receive a reasonable monthly allowance while he kept our home, our savings, and everything we'd built together. I was expected to quietly return to my rural hometown, where I could live out my remaining years in a small house he would generously help renovate. "This can't be legal," I whispered to myself, though there was no one left to hear me. That afternoon, I made a call that would change everything. James Porter had been a respected attorney in our community for 30 years, specializing in family law. When I explained my situation, expecting perhaps sympathy, but little else, his response surprised me. "Mrs. Adams, what your husband is proposing isn't just unfair, it's unconscionable," he said, his voice vibrating with controlled anger. "In your situation, we must expose him as the guilty party in this marriage. Otherwise, if he argues in court that he supported you all these years, it could put you at a disadvantage when it comes to dividing assets." For the first time since Thomas had announced he was leaving me for his college sweetheart, I felt a flicker of hope. "What should we do?" I asked. "Document everything." James advised, "Every detail about your marriage, the sacrifices you made, how he's treated you over the years, and especially any evidence of his relationship with this woman before her husband passed away." Under James's guidance, I began gathering evidence. I recorded a short video explaining my situation, how I'd supported Thomas through his education, raised our daughter, maintained our home for 50 years, only to be discarded when I was no longer useful. "I don't want him back," and I concluded. A line James insisted I add. "I just want what I'm owed." When we released the video online, the response was overwhelming. "Wait, isn't this the woman from that high-profile wedding? The first wife, Grandma? You did the right thing. You have to fight for your rights." The comments flooded in, most supporting me, though some criticized what they saw as my attempt to cash in on the situation. With James's legal expertise and an unexpected piece of evidence from Sylvia's late husband's nephew photographs documenting Thomas and Sylvia's decades-long affair, we froze all the family assets pending the divorce settlement. This threw Thomas and our daughter into a panic. "You froze all the family assets. How are we supposed to live now?" my daughter messaged, her indignation palpable even through text. Thomas called immediately after. "Helen, how could you really go through with suing me? Do you want to ruin my reputation?" His voice was agitated, no longer the composed scholar who had lectured at prestigious universities for decades. I didn't bother entertaining him. James released an official statement. "Mrs. Helen Adams has formally filed for divorce. The only dispute remains the division of assets. My client dedicated her life to this family, only to be betrayed in her later years and left with nothing. This is simply unjust. As her attorney, I will ensure that her legal rights are protected and will take legal action against those spreading false accusations against her." As public opinion swayed in my favor and Thomas's academic reputation began to crumble, he and Sylvia appeared at my door one evening. Sylvia nearly collapsed, tears streaming down her face. "Helen, please, I can't take this anymore. I'm begging you, let us go, let this go." Thomas stood beside her, face flushed with humiliation. After a long silence, he muttered, "If you leave Sylvia alone, I'll come back. We can go back to the way things were." I stared at him, incredulous, before letting out a short laugh. "You really think too highly of yourself, don't you? You actually believe I'm doing all this just to get you back?" I shook my head slowly. "Thomas, the day you asked for a divorce was the day I stopped considering you my husband. I'm not trying to win you back. I'm simply taking back what I deserve." Half an hour after they left, James called. "Thomas has agreed to sign the divorce papers." He informed me. I wasn't surprised. Thomas had spent his whole life obsessed with his reputation, There was no way he would drag himself to court over a divorce at 70, especially with the evidence we had. The settlement was simple. The house would remain his, but aside from the cash in our accounts, he would compensate me with an additional $300,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was far more than the pittance he had initially offered, and enough for me to start anew. "You fought hard, Mrs. Adams," James said when we finalized the agreement. "Most women in your position would have accepted what they were given, afraid to rock the boat." And I smiled, thinking of all the years I'd spent trying not to rock the boat, trying to be the perfect wife. At 70, I finally learned that some boats deserve to be rocked. With my settlement, I purchased land in my hometown and built a farmhouse restaurant that quickly gained popularity. I grew vegetables, raised chickens and ducks, and created a peaceful retreat that drew visitors from miles around. For the first time in my life, I answered to no one but myself. When a young woman approached me one day, asking if I was that brave divorced grandma, I realized my story had inspired others. "You prove that even at 70, you can start a new life," she told me, admiration in her eyes. Standing on my porch that evening, watching the sun set over my flourishing garden, I felt a profound peace. The money had given me independence, yes, but it was the fight itself, the refusal to be silently pushed aside, that had given me something far more valuable, my dignity. The $300,000 settlement sat in my bank account for precisely 3 days before I made my decision. While most women my age might have invested it conservatively or used it to secure comfortable assisted living arrangements, I had other plans. After a lifetime of being told what I couldn't do, I was finally free to prove everyone wrong. You're buying land at your age. The real estate agent couldn't hide his surprise when I inquired about the 5-acre plot just outside my hometown. The property had been neglected for years, overgrown with weeds, the old farmhouse falling into disrepair. But where others saw decay, I saw possibility. "Yes," I replied simply. "I'm 70, not dead." And the closing went smoothly, and within a month, the deed was in my name, Martha Wilson, property owner. The first time I stood on my land, the spring breeze rustling through the tall grass, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades, pure, unbridled joy. No one was there to criticize my choices or remind me of my limitations. The land didn't care about my age or education level. It would respond to care and attention, nothing more. I hired local contractors to renovate the farmhouse, insisting on being involved in every decision. "We'll keep the original hardwood floors," I directed. "And those beautiful ceiling beams, they stay too." I wanted the place to maintain its rustic charm while adding modern amenities that would make it suitable for my vision, a farm-to-table restaurant where I would serve meals made from ingredients grown on my own land. A restaurant. My daughter Rebecca's voice crackled with disbelief over the phone when I told her my plans. "Mom, do you have any idea how much work that is? The licensing alone will be a nightmare. And you've never even worked in food service." "I've cooked for your father for 50 years, I reminded her. "And unlike him, my customers will actually appreciate it." While the renovation was underway, I started clearing land for my garden. Each morning, I rose with the sun, pulled on my work gloves, and tackled another section of the overgrown property. Neighbors occasionally stopped by, curious about the elderly woman single-handedly transforming the abandoned farm. "You need help with that," Joe Bradford called out one morning as I struggled with a particularly stubborn root. "I could use an extra pair of hands," I admitted. Before long, Joe and his wife Clara became regular visitors, bringing along their grandchildren who delighted in helping me plant rows of tomatoes, peppers, lettuce, and herbs. Word spread through the community, and others began to drop by, some offering assistance, others simply wanting to witness my progress. By midsummer, my garden was flourishing. I added a small chicken coop and purchased a dozen hens for fresh eggs. 2 friendly ducks took up residence in the pond I'd restored at the back of the property. My hands, once soft from decades of domestic life, grew calloused and strong. My skin deepened to a healthy tan. The physical work was exhausting, but exhilarating, each ache a reminder that I was building something that was entirely mine. The day I hung the hand-painted sign, Wilson's Farm Table, above the restored farmhouse door, was one of the proudest moments of my life. Inside, the space was warm and inviting. 6 rustic wooden tables with chairs I'd personally refinished, windows draped with simple linen curtains, and mason jars filled with wildflowers on every table. The kitchen gleamed with the essential equipment I'd carefully selected, modest but functional. "We're only open Friday through Sunday," I explained to my first customers, a retired couple from 2 towns over who had heard about my place through friends. "Everything on the menu comes from my garden or local producers. It's simple food, honestly prepared." That first weekend, I served just 15 customers. The following weekend, 30 came. By the end of the first month, I had to start taking reservations. People were driving from as far as 50 miles away to sample my roasted chicken with herbs, fresh salads, and berry cobblers. A food blogger from the nearest city wrote a glowing review describing Wilson's Farm Table as a hidden gem where authenticity isn't a marketing slogan, but a way of life. What began as a bold experiment had transformed into a thriving business. More importantly, it had transformed me. Gone was the timid housewife who had spent decades doubting her worth. In her place stood a confident entrepreneur who greeted each day with purpose and pride. One Sunday afternoon, as I was serving my signature apple pie, a young woman stopped me with a gentle touch on my arm. "Excuse me, but are you Martha? The woman who started this place after her divorce?" I nodded, wondering how she knew my story. "I just wanted to tell you how inspiring you are," she continued, her eyes bright with admiration. "My grandmother read about you online. She's going through a difficult divorce after 40 years of marriage, and your story gave her hope that there can be a meaningful life afterward." Tears pricked at my eyes as I thanked her. Walking back to the kitchen, I thought about how my personal pain had somehow bloomed into something beautiful, not just for me, but for others who might see in my journey a path forward for themselves. For as the sun sets over my flourishing garden each evening, I often think about how the worst chapter of my life led to the most fulfilling one. Edward and his new wife occasionally appear in the local news. Their smiles a bit more strained these days, their golden love story tarnished by the truth that emerged during our divorce. But I no longer measure my worth against his betrayal. At 70-plus years, surrounded by the life I've built with my own hands, I've discovered that it's never too late to plant new seeds and watch them grow. I never wished for their downfall. When I filed for divorce from Edward, my only goal was to secure what I rightfully deserved after 50 years of marriage. I never imagined how thoroughly the truth would dismantle the carefully constructed image they had built together. Yet as I tended to my blooming garden one April morning, planting tomato seedlings in the rich soil of my new property, I received a phone call that revealed just how far they had fallen. "Mrs. Caldwell, this is Jennifer Lawson. I was one of your husband's, Professor Harrison's graduate students. The young woman's voice held a note of hesitation. I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from a mutual acquaintance. Not at all, I replied, brushing dirt from my hands as I sat on the wooden bench beneath my apple tree. What can I do for you? I wanted you to know what happened yesterday at Westridge University. She said. They removed Professor Harrison's portrait from the faculty hall. It was quite something to witness. The maintenance crew came during lunch hour when they thought the building would be nearly empty. They didn't make an announcement or anything, but word spread quickly. I closed my eyes, picturing the distinguished oil painting that had hung prominently in the university's main academic building for 15 years. Edward had been so proud of that portrait commissioned after he received the Distinguished Faculty Award. He had insisted I come see it when it was first installed. One of the few times he had ever invited me to campus during our entire marriage. There's more, Jennifer continued. The university issued a statement this morning. They've terminated his emeritus status and special teaching contract. The official reason given was conduct unbecoming of a faculty member. But everyone knows it's because of, well, everything that came out during your divorce. The university's action was just the latest in a series of dominoes that had fallen since Patrick's damning photographs had revealed the truth about Edward and Catherine's decades-long affair. The scandal had spread through academic circles with remarkable speed, tarnishing both their reputations in ways I never could have anticipated. For Catherine, the fallout had been equally severe. As an acclaimed author whose books explored themes of loyalty and moral integrity, the revelation that she had carried on a lengthy affair with my husband while her own husband was alive struck her readers as the height of hypocrisy. 3 major publishing houses had publicly severed ties with her, issuing carefully worded statements that emphasized the importance of integrity in their authors. Integrity matters as much as talent. One publisher declared, "We value literature, but we value morality just as much. Both are indispensable." Catherine's most recent book tour had been canceled. Bookstores across the country had pulled her works from their shelves. The literary prizes and honorary doctorates that had once defined her career now seemed hollow in light of her personal conduct. Professor Harrison hasn't been back to campus since the news broke, Jennifer added. There are rumors that he and Ms. Winters have moved to a smaller condo across town. Apparently, they've been getting hate mail at their previous address. I felt a complicated mix of emotions at this news not satisfaction. Exactly. But a sense that justice had somehow been served. Not by my hand, but by the natural consequences of their own actions. Thank you for letting me know, I told Jennifer, uncertain why she had felt compelled to share this information with me. She hesitated before answering. When the scandal first broke, I was devastated. I had idolized both of them, Professor Harrison as a mentor, and Ms. Winters as the writer I aspired to become. Finding out the truth behind their relationship, it shattered something in me. Her voice grew stronger. But then I heard about what you did after the divorce, how you bought land and started your own business at 70. That's when I realized that the real inspiration wasn't who I thought it was. After we hung up, I sat for a long while beneath the apple tree, contemplating how thoroughly lives can change in the span of a few months. My daughter Laura called later that evening, her voice tense and strained. "Mom, did you hear what happened at Dad's university?" she asked without preamble. "I did," I replied evenly. "Everything's falling apart for them," she continued, a note of panic in her voice. Dad's colleagues won't return his calls. Catherine's publisher has canceled her contract for her next book. They're talking about selling the house. They can't afford the mortgage anymore now that neither of them has steady income. And Laura had been her father's staunchest defender throughout the divorce, even going so far as to post publicly about my supposed domineering personality and how I had made their lives miserable. Now, her tone held a different quality, fear mixed with dawning recognition of her miscalculation. Dad was wrong, she admitted after a long silence. I was wrong too. We shouldn't have treated you that way. I could have said many things in that moment. I could have reminded her how eagerly she had embraced Catherine as her real mother, how quickly she had dismissed my decades of caregiving as worthless. I could have pointed out that she was only calling now because her father's disgrace was affecting her own social standing. Instead, I simply said, "Yes, you were wrong." "What should I do now?" she asked, sounding lost. "That's for you to figure out." I replied gently but firmly. "I've spent my whole life telling others what to do with theirs. I'm done with that now." As spring turned to summer, I heard through various channels how Edward and Catherine's grand love story had devolved into something far less romantic. The passionate reunion of college sweethearts that had once made them social media darlings now seemed tawdry and calculated. The hashtag that had once accompanied their wedding photos, #LoveKnowsNoFear, had become a subject of mockery. Meanwhile, my small farmhouse restaurant flourished. Each weekend, guests drove from miles around to enjoy meals prepared with vegetables from my garden and eggs from my chickens. I expanded the dining area to accommodate more tables and hired 2 part-time helpers from the local high school. My hands grew calloused from honest work, my heart lighter with each passing month. I never sought revenge, only justice and the chance to begin again. That their carefully constructed facade crumbled under the weight of truth was not my doing, but perhaps it was necessary, a reminder that actions, eventually, have consequences, no matter how long delayed they may be. The familiar chime of my cell phone interrupted the peaceful rhythm of my evening. I was sitting on the porch of my farmhouse, watching the sunset paint golden streaks across my flourishing vegetable garden. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. These quiet moments of reflection had become precious to me in my newfound independence. But something compelled me to answer, and when I saw my daughter Melissa's name on the screen, my heart gave an involuntary lurch. "Hello," I answered, trying to keep my voice neutral. Our last conversation, months ago, had ended with her defending her father and his new wife with a passion that still stung when I thought about it. There was silence on the other end, followed by what sounded like a stifled sob. "Mom!" Melissa's voice was thin, barely more than a whisper. "Mom, I messed up." I sat straighter in my wicker chair, unprepared for the vulnerability in her tone. This was not the confident, dismissive daughter who had stood beside her father at his wedding to Charlotte, thrusting a bouquet into the hands of the woman who had replaced me. "I've lost everything," he continued, her words tumbling out between shaky breaths. "My job, they let me go last week. The position Charlotte promised to help me get at her publishing house. It fell through. No one will return my calls anymore." I didn't respond immediately, remembering all too clearly how Melissa had once looked at me with clear, unwavering disdain as she said, "Dad is a scholar, an expert. His students are spread all across the country. He's a man of influence. And you're nothing more than an uneducated housewife." "What would you like me to say?" I finally asked, my voice calm but not unkind. "I don't know," she admitted. I didn't have anyone else to call." The irony wasn't lost on me. For months after Howard left, I had called Melissa repeatedly, desperate for some connection, some comfort from my only child. She had either ignored my calls or kept our conversations brief and cold, making it clear where her loyalty lay. The social circle I was trying to join Charlotte's literary friends and Dad's academic colleagues, they've all turned their backs on me. Melissa explained, after everything that came out during your divorce, no one wants to associate with us anymore. Charlotte's books being pulled from shelves, Dad losing his position at the university, it's affected me too. Everyone sees me as part of the scandal now. I gazed out at my garden, at the tomato plants heavy with fruit, the rows of lettuce and carrots, all tangible proof of my own rebirth. Your father and Charlotte made their choices, I said evenly, and you made yours. I know, she whispered. I chose wrong. For 50 years, I had been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over and put others' needs before my own. Even now, a part of me wanted to comfort my daughter, to tell her everything would be all right. But the woman I had become in the last year, the woman who had fought for what she deserved and built something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal, knew better. I told you, I replied softly. You can't climb on the backs of others to get ahead. What you wanted was to take from others, but in the end, it only left you with nothing. The silence that followed was heavy with recognition. I was so sure Charlotte would open doors for me, Melissa finally said. Her connections, her influence. It seemed like the perfect opportunity. And I genuinely believed you were holding Dad back all those years. That he deserved someone who could match his intellect, who could understand his work. Her voice cracked. I never stopped to think about what you had sacrificed for us. I remembered the day Melissa had pushed me out of Howard's wedding reception, eager to get rid of me before I could make a scene. She had shoved cash into my hands, $100, to make me go away, as if 5 decades of motherhood could be dismissed with a few bills. Here, take a cab and go home. I'll come back after the wedding and have dinner with you. Okay? Even my grandson Tyler had been influenced by their narrative. Grandma, does this mean you won't live with us anymore? He had asked innocently. I heard Mom and Grandpa talking about sending you back to your hometown. After a moment of thought, he had added with brutal childhood honesty, if you leave, I won't get to eat your chocolate cake anymore. But if people find out my new grandma is Charlotte, they'll be so jealous of me. What do you want from me now? Melissa, I asked, my voice gentle but firm. I don't know, she admitted. Forgiveness, maybe a chance to start over. I considered her request, thinking about all the nights I had lain awake wondering what I had done wrong as a mother, how I had raised a daughter who could so easily discard me. Forgiveness isn't something I can just hand to you, I told her. It's something that needs to be earned, through actions rather than words. I understand, she said quietly. Would it be okay if I came to visit sometime? I'd like to see your restaurant. People say it's wonderful. A small smile tugged at my lips. My little farmhouse restaurant had indeed become something of a local sensation. Visitors drove from miles around for my farm-fresh meals, and a regional magazine had recently featured me in a spread about second-act success stories. You can come for dinner this Sunday, I offered. As a customer, we'll talk afterward. As I hung up the phone, I felt no triumph in my daughter's fall from grace, no satisfaction in being proven right. There was only a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes important lessons come at a terrible price. Melissa had sought status and connections through Charlotte, only to discover that a foundation built on betrayal cannot stand. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the hills now, casting long shadows across my land. Tomorrow would bring another day of honest work, of greeting customers with a genuine smile, of living the life I had created for myself. And perhaps, if Melissa was truly ready to see me, not as the simple housewife she had dismissed, but as the woman I had always been beneath that label, it might also bring the beginning of healing between us. As I stand on the porch of my farmhouse each evening, watching the sunset paint the hills in golden hues, I reflect on the journey that brought me here. At 72, I've discovered a peace I never knew possible during my 50 years of marriage to Charles. The $300,000 from our divorce settlement money. He initially wanted to deny me, transform not just my circumstances, but my spirit. With those funds, I purchased this land and built my now thriving farm-to-table restaurant. I grow my own vegetables, tend to my chickens and ducks, and welcome guests who drive miles to experience the authentic meals I prepare. My hands, once soft from decades of domestic life, now bear the calluses of meaningful work. My heart, once heavy with rejection, now beats with purpose and pride. The betrayal that nearly broke me finding my husband wanted to discard me for his college sweetheart after 5 decades together became the catalyst for my rebirth. While Charles and Rebecca faced the consequences of their actions, their reputations in tatters, I've blossomed in unexpected ways. My daughter Jennifer, who once chose status over loyalty, recently called with a tearful admission, "Mom, I messed up. I've lost everything." I felt no triumph in her distress, only hope that perhaps now she understands that happiness built on others' pain can never truly satisfy. What's most surprising is that at an age when many believe life's greatest chapters are behind them, I've discovered my story was just beginning. The woman who was once dismissed as just an uneducated housewife now runs a successful business, makes her own decisions, and sleeps peacefully under stars that seem brighter than they've ever been. Friends, if there's one truth I've learned through this journey, it's this. It is never, absolutely never too late to reclaim your life. Age is not an expiration date on your dreams. The very moment you believe your story is over might actually be the perfect beginning of your most authentic chapter. Many of us stay in situations that diminish us because we fear the unknown. We endure disrespect, neglect, or indifference because we believe that's all we deserve or all that's possible. We tell ourselves, "I'm too old to start over." "This is just how life is." Or, "I should be grateful for what I have." Child, but I'm standing testimony that at 70 years old, you can face betrayal, fight for what's rightfully yours, and build something beautiful from the ashes of what was lost. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's ability to see it. Your potential doesn't diminish with age. It transforms and deepens, like fine wine gaining complexity over time. So I ask you today, what dream have you set aside? What part of yourself have you silenced? What step, however small, could you take toward a life that honors your true worth? Share your story in the comments below. I want to hear about the changes you're considering, the steps you've already taken, or even the fears that hold you back. This community understands that real courage isn't about fearlessness. It's about moving forward despite your fears. And if this message resonated with you, please subscribe to join our growing family of late bloomers and second chance seekers. Together, we're proving that life's most beautiful seasons might just arrive precisely when we thought the harvest was over. Remember, the question isn't whether you're too old to begin again. It's whether you're brave enough to embrace the beginning that's waiting for you.